Hi folks, welcome back to Mr. Hines Classics channel. Now as promised, this is the first of my remake videos where throughout this series I'll be analysing some of the major sanctuary sites throughout ancient Greece. Today you join me in Delphi, located on the foothills of Mount Parnassus, up in this northern region of Greece known as Phocis. Now, Delphi has been occupied for a really long time, and we even have evidence of a Mycenaean settlement here. But this has been a site that's been long associated with the idea of oracles, prophecy, and generally consulting the divine. The sanctuary site is dedicated to Apollo, but I'll say more about his involvement and the mythology surrounding him later on in this video. I wanted to start by explaining that Delphi is a pan-Hellenic site, and what I mean by that is that people from all over the Greek world, and even beyond the Greek world, would come here to Delphi to consult Apollo's oracle, or priestess, known as the Pythia. Usually this was reserved for the leaders in the Greek world, or even beyond the Greek world, like kings in Persia, for example. And they come here in times of emergency quite often to consult the oracle about what to do. A famous example of this is Themistocles, who the Athenians sent in around 480 BC, just before the Battle of Salamis, to consult the Pythia as what to do about the impending Persian invasions. Themistocles was told to put faith in the wooden walls, and he interpreted this to mean strengthen up the navy as opposed to strengthen the defences of the city, such as the walls. It was a good job he interpreted it this way as well, because the Athenians went on to win that naval battle at Salamis. The Athenians then also went on to push the Persians out of Greece during the Persian invasions. So let's get into it. Let's have a look at the site in a little bit more detail and depth. So we actually start off in front of the sanctuary site itself, actually looking at a smaller sanctuary dedicated to Athena. This site here is known as the Sanctuary of Athena Pronaia. Pronaia means forethought or beforehand, and it's quite aptly named because it is before the main sanctuary site of Delphi up here. And it sort of focuses on Athena's role. She's goddess of wisdom and war, and it focuses on that idea of wisdom. Pronaia, as I said, meaning forethought. So she's linked to prophecy here. It's a very small sanctuary. It's made up of a small temple dedicated to Athena, some smaller buildings here, and this round tholos building. Anybody wanting to go up to the main sanctuary site would actually have to pass either through the sanctuary of Athena Pronaia or come alongside it as they go up Mount Parnassus to the main sanctuary itself. So I wanted to take you through some of the journey up Mount Parnassus, because before we get to the Sanctuary of Delphi itself, there's another important stopping point that visitors would need to come to, and it's this here. It's this natural spring known as the Castilian Spring or the Castilian Fountain. Now, this site was really important for people wanting to visit the Pythia. They would have to cleanse themselves before they could do so. They'd have to wash off what's known as miasma or pollution. The Pythia and the priests at Delphi would also come here to get clean, and this was a water source that was also used to cleanse the temple itself. Now, as I walk up the rest of Mount Parnassus to the site here, I wanted to say a little bit about how Delphi was governed, because it's not the locals of Delphi that actually organise and run the sanctuary site here, but instead it's a league, a group of people called the Amphictyonic League, and this was members of different city-states that would come together as sort of like a council to run the religious affairs here at Delphi. And whilst at first that might seem a bit unfair on the local people of Delphi that they don't get to solely run the site, when we think about this being a pan-Hellenic site, and people from all over the Greek world coming to see the oracle, we can see that the Amphictyonic League is meant to at least keep a sense of impartiality, and that's why there's a body that governs it rather than just the people of Delphi themselves. Now, as you enter the sanctuary site, you first come onto this pathway known as the Sacred Way, and this snakes its way all around the sanctuary site, eventually culminating up at the top there at the Temple of Apollo. And you can see this Sacred Way is littered with all sorts of buildings and monuments, and these were things that were dedicated by city-states to Apollo. They're meant to be sort of like votive offerings, And I'll talk more about the small buildings in just a moment. Now, on the one hand, these are offerings to Apollo to thank the god for various different things. But in another way, they're also a really good way for city-states to show off to one another. Delphi sort of acts as a bit of a message board for the rest of the Greek world. A lot of people are coming here, and that's really good. People can come and meet here, discuss events, things that are going on, especially in times of emergency, but they can also show off to each other. And that's what these monuments and these buildings do. I love that every time I study Delphi or play this game, I learn something new about some of these monuments. This bull, for example, was dedicated by the people of Corcyra after a day of miraculous tuna fishing, apparently. And you can see throughout, look, there's lots of statues here as we go through. And as I say, these buildings. Now, these buildings kind of look like small temples, but they're actually treasuries. And they're dedicated by different city-states here at Delphi, and they house specific votive offerings that are meant to honour the gods. But these go beyond just a simple sort of building function to house things. They're highly decorative. So here, I'm stood in front of the Treasury of the Athenians, and this is built in Doric style. And what that means is those columns are very, these fluted columns are very sort of blocky and heavy, and at the top they don't have those Ionic scrolls that you see. But what really marks this out as being Doric is if we look in this section here, we have a band of sculpture that's you have these sections that are sculpted here broken up by these things known as triglyphs. And these spaces here are called metopes that are sculpted. Now, on this Treasury of the Athenians, it would have shown something to do with Heracles and Theseus. The game likes to generate all the metopes as the labours of Heracles, and I'm not sure that that was what was on the Treasury of the Athenians, but certainly Heracles was, and Theseus was as well. And then we come up to this section here known as a pediment, and this would have been sculpted or painted in some fashion as well. So these areas here are going well beyond just being a simple building to house votive offerings, but rather being these quite ornate and decorative buildings to also show off a bit about the people who built them. Now, that Treasury of the Athenians that I'm just jumping off now, that was built somewhere just after the Battle of Marathon, I believe, in 490 BC, as a way to thank Apollo. But it was built, I think, to outdo this treasury. This treasury was built in 525 BC by the Siphnians, a small island in Greece. They built it to thank Apollo for a vein of silver that they found on their island. And as I said, this was built in 525 BC. The Treasury of the Athenians was built in 490. I think they're trying to outdo it, and I'm not sure how successful the Athenians are. This is really known as quite a remarkable treasury. We have these two maidens as columns here known as Caryatid maidens. And one of the other places that we see such a design is on the Erechtheion temple on the Acropolis in Athens. It's a highly stylized and unusual feature. As we go up as well, we no longer have a Doric design with those metopes, but instead we have a continuous frieze. And all four sides of this treasury were sculpted, showing various different scenes of mythology. The northern side would have shown the gods fighting the giants. We have on the west side the Judgment of Paris. There's the abduction of maybe Helen or Persephone on the south side, and on the east side we have the Trojan War. And these remains, or at least some of these remains, are in the archaeological museum at Delphi, so you can see some of them. The northern side, the gods fighting, and the side with the Trojan War are the sides that survived the best. There would have been a pediment that would have also featured some sort of sculpture. I'm not too sure what would have been on here. But we can see, like, really decorative and going well beyond the function of just housing votive offerings. These treasuries have an inner room known as a naos, and these would be where the votive offerings would be. But as we can see, as I say, going well beyond the idea of just housing monuments and buildings. Okay, so we then carry on up through the sanctuary site on the Sacred Way. More treasuries. Ooh, I'll come back for him later. So we have more treasuries, more buildings. And we have this building here. Now, this is not a treasury. This is the Boulaterion. And this is where the local council would meet to discuss the governance of Delphi. So perhaps members of the Amphictyonic League would come here as well. And we pass by a seemingly quite innocuous rock here that doesn't seem to be doing much. But actually, this is some important history. This is known as the Sibylline rock. And before Delphi was Delphi, we have a massive sanctuary site here. This was actually used by a Sibyl, a prophetess, who according to legends after the Trojan War would give prophecies here. She supposedly would stand on this rock and give her prophecies to a gathered crowd. She's not linked with Pythia in any way. This is separate of Apollo. Now's actually probably a good time to talk about some of the mythology that surrounds Delphi. We actually start with Zeus. You see, Zeus wanted to find the centre of the earth. Which is also the belly button of his grandmother Gaia, which I know sounds a bit weird. So to find the centre of the earth, Zeus sent two eagles, one flying from the east and one flying from the west. And the point in which they crossed was Delphi. And Zeus marked this site with a boundary marker known as an omphalos, a stone that means centre or belly button in Greek. It's the same stone actually that he used, that Gaia used to deceive Kronos when he was eating his young, and passed off instead of Zeus. So this site then first becomes sacred with Zeus, and we have another sort of tale then that sort of goes on and says this site was also always sort of linked with the idea of prophecy and visions and speaking to the divine. Allegedly, there was a goat herd who noticed one day his goats playing in this chasm, or next to this chasm in the earth. And when he went to inspect it more closely, something to do with vapours that were coming out of this chasm put him into some sort of prophetic-like trance. And that actually kind of tracks with the geography of Delphi, because Delphi's built on a fault line, and sulfur deposits are spewed up into the air, and apparently that has hallucinogenic effects. So this would sort of send people allegedly into trances, and the Pythia would go into trances when making her prophecy. So there is an argument to be made that basically everybody's just high in Delphi and speaking gibberish that they're sort of saying is some sort of divine wisdom. Now, if we go back to that myth with this site being important to Zeus, he left in charge to protect this site a snake known as the Pytho in Greek. We obviously get the word python from this. Apollo comes here one day and kills the python for some reason and sort of claims this site to do with him and prophecy, and then he gets associated with this site thereafter. So we've got a lot of gods associated with Delphi. We have Gaia, we have Zeus, and we have Apollo. Now, if you look behind the Sibylline rock, there's this column, which is another one of these votive offerings. And this time, this is dedicated by the island of Naxos. This is known as the Naxian Column. It's about 10 meters tall actually, and it's topped with this sphinx. And the people of Naxos are obviously giving quite an important, significant, visible monument here, which says something about them. And apparently is meant to represent the apparent tomb of Dionysus. Dionysus is also associated with Delphi. The Sphinx is kind of relevant as well, because when we think of the Sphinx that gave riddles to Oedipus, and he solved the riddle to then become king of Thebes, we think of that idea of like solving these riddles linking to the idea of perhaps divine wisdom and prophecy, and again it sort of links to the nature of what's going on here at Delphi. So let's move on. And now we're going past what's known as a portico, or perhaps a stoa. And these are basically just a shaded area held up by columns where people would again come to gather, meet, discuss things, get out of the sun basically. And that's really important when we think about Pan-Hellenic sites. We think about Delphi being the sort of area where people would come together, share news with one another, and that's exactly what would happen in these Stoa. Now you can see there's a lot of people queuing here in the game, and this is because this is the queue that makes up going to see the Pythia. And we'll talk more about that process in just a bit. I want to actually talk about this column for a second, another one. Now this is a bronze column. It's known as the Serpent Column, and you can see it's 3 snakes intertwined with actually a tripod on top of it. And this was put up in about 479 BC, just after the Battle of Plataea, and that was the final battle, the final major battle in the Persian invasions, where the Persians were finally kicked out of Greece. And this column basically represents everybody who took part in the war. Each coil of the column had the name of a city-state inscribed on it that had a role to play. And so this becomes a sort of symbol of sort of Pan-Hellenic unity, and I can't think of too many monuments and symbols of Pan-Hellenic unity like this, certainly in this fashion in the Greek world. So it's a very important piece. Now, we move on, and we can see that this crowd has gathered, and they're going to go into the Temple of Apollo, or members are going to go into the Temple of Apollo here and address the Pythia and get some sort of revelation. And this process is known as Pronaia, who, like, you know, you make your offering, perhaps, I don't know, pay your fee to these guys here, check everything's in order, and then you get to go and see the Pythia. And the Pythia is not open like every day of the week. There's only certain times that you could go and consult the oracle. Now, interestingly, we have a big altar here where people would make sacrifices, blood sacrifices to Apollo. And this altar in particular is quite significant because in about the 3rd or 4th century BC, the people of Chios the people of Chios dedicated this altar, and this gave them some sort of permission to go first and always consult the Pythia first, so this gave them sort of some special precedence. Now, we've got the Temple of Apollo here. You can't go in, I'm afraid, in the game, but you can see it's this large temple. We've got the usual sort of 6 columns that come up at the front, and it's 15 columns wide. And the temple that you see today, if you go to Delphi, is actually one that was rebuilt. There was a fire that built down this temple, and there was one that was rebuilt in about 373 BC. But what we know of it was that it was a Doric temple, as the game depicts here. Again, metopes and a sculpted pediment. I don't know particularly what would have been shown. I believe there's something to do with Apollo on his chariot. I'm not sure what the metopes would have shown. I know there's inscriptions on this temple that would have said, one says, "Know thyself," and another one says, "Nothing in excess." I believe the pediments may have shown, again, the gods fighting the giants, and that's a normal trope and motif in Greek art. What's quite unusual about this temple is that most temples have a cult statue, and they're usually at the end of the temple, inside the naos, looking back to the entrance. And this temple does have a cult statue, apparently of Apollo, but it's set off here, looking this way, inside the naos, not at the back, and it's believed it was off center because there was some sort of secret chamber that would go beneath the temple, and this is where the Pythia would give her revelations, and this was seen as like the very center, and this was the omphalos properly itself. Now, if you've played the game, you'll know that beneath this temple there is a secret chamber, and a lot goes on down there, but I won't say any more because that'll spoil the game a little bit. Now, just a few other things to look at, and of course it'd be rude not to dive off in the typical Assassin's Creed fashion. We have just a few other things to note. We have this bronze statue here that depicts a charioteer. This statue is known as the Delphic Charioteer. And this is an early Greek bronze. It doesn't survive this well to us today. In fact, it's just the charioteer really that survives. But it's this highly decorative bronze statue that was made in somewhere between 478 and 474 BC. It depicts the victory of a Sicilian leader known as Polyzalis in games that would take here, in chariot games that would take part here at Delphi. That charioteer is not Polyzalis himself, but rather a slave who he would pay to drive his chariots for him. But this bronze is really good because we can see that the Greek sculpture is really starting to improve with the innovations. Bronze is a lot lighter, so it allows you to sort of sculpt in more ambitious sort of poses and more ambitious sort of things. And the innovations then that took place in bronze then went back into marble, and Greek sculpture really starts to improve at this point. Now I mentioned that we had those chariot races that took part here because Delphi and a lot of these sanctuary sites in the Greek world would also have games that would surround them of various different types, and they would honour their gods. So at Olympia we obviously have the Olympic Games. At Athens we had the Panathenaia, or the Panathenaic Games, as part of the Panathenaia, and at Delphi you have the Pythian Games that would take place to honour Apollo. And you can see at the moment I'm walking up this theatre that was also here because part of the Pythian Games also involved the idea of dramatic plays. So these would also be taking place here to honour Apollo. And with the little link to Dionysus that I mentioned earlier, there's also a link therefore to drama. If you look beyond here, I don't think it's represented in the games, but there would also be a stadion, a running track would be somewhere over here. So we know that foot races were also part of the special games that took place. And that's pretty much it for the Sanctuary of Delphi that I wanted to mention, certainly that I can get in a video. I would just mention that there is a cave behind the main site here, known as the Carycian Cave, and this is where more everyday people would go to see some sort of lost oracle that would sort of say something about your future using dice, basically. But this is the reserve. Certainly going to see the Pythia here is the reserve of, like I said, leaders in the Greek world and nobility. So just thinking about how this fits into different courses, particularly if you're studying A-level classical civilization, if you're studying the Greek religion topic, sanctuary sites is a really big feature of this, and Delphi obviously comes up. And as with all sanctuary sites, I'd certainly be thinking about how you'll get questions around, is the sanctuary site there to glorify the gods or glorify the people that come here and, put up these monuments? And I'd always say it's a bit of both. When we got these questions about, what is the purpose, what is the function of these sanctuary sites? Obviously, first and foremost, it's there to honour a god. The mythology, the buildings, the votive offerings, the games, they all go and honour the god that any of these sanctuary sites are dedicated to. But it also does more than that. It's also the opportunity for city-states to vie against each other, say something about themselves, say something about their position in the Greek world, and sort of vie for, I suppose, to impress each other. So that's a key area I can see this coming up in certainly on the A-level course. It'd be relevant in other courses. I could see myth and religion areas to talk about honouring the gods, Apollo in the gods topic, for example. But certainly on that Greek religion topic, about sanctuary sites, it's a key area that would come up. Okay, so I'll leave it here for today. Thank you so much for watching this video. It does really help the channel if you can like and subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next one.